Imagine you live in a house where heavy wardrobes mysteriously shift. Your couch catches fire from within, and your table jumps into the air. But this isn't everything. The strict political regime calls for fast case closure, and so the blame is shifted onto the most innocent person. Let's dive right into it. It was winter of 1985, and the Smolka family of 4 were all home, spending the evening together in their house located in the town of Poltergeist in Czechoslovakia. Mr. and Mrs. Smolka, together with Mr. Smolka's father, were in the living room, talking and drinking some tea. And their 11-year-old son Tomáš was playing with a few of his old and beaten cars, right there on the floor. Now Tomáš really loved his toys, but recently his mind was occupied with something entirely else. The fact was that Tomáš was actually becoming afraid of the house, or more specifically of something that was hiding within the house. The young boy used to play in all of its rooms, but recently he only started to spend time in the room that there was someone else from his family with him. And this was because he was too scared to be on his own. Several weeks earlier, Tomáš was in his parents' bedroom when he saw a giant heavy wardrobe, which was sitting in a corner, move on its own towards the middle of the room, dragging the carpet with it underneath. Tomáš got really spooked, and so he ran away into their living room and brought his parents back into the bedroom with him to show them what had just happened. Now, the parents tried dismissing him at first, but Tomáš was relentless, and so his dad finally agreed to go into the master bedroom to have a look. And when he got there, he could see the wardrobe sitting in the middle of the room. But then, out of nowhere, it started to move again on its own, scrapping across the floor back into the corner. Mr. Smolka couldn't believe his eyes. How was this possible? The wardrobe was easily over 300 kilos, so there was no way it would have been moved on its own like that. Something must have been pushing it, but he could not see anyone. It was during a broad daylight, and so if someone was pulling a prank on them, he would be definitely able to see them. Now, not really knowing what to make of this, Mr. Smolka returned to the living room and decided to just put that behind them. But it would turn out that this was only the beginning. After the grown-ups were done drinking their tea, they told Tomáš to get ready for bed. So Tomáš put away his toys and walked over to the bathroom to brush his teeth. And after he was done, he kissed his mom goodnight and went into his bedroom. About 2 hours later, Tomáš was suddenly woken up by a very strange noise. When the boy was trying to figure out where it was coming from, at first he could not really tell because his room seemed to be quiet. But then he could hear that sound again. And that is when he realized that it must have been coming from the bathroom, because it sounded like something was falling onto the tile bathroom floor. Tomáš really wanted to investigate what was going on, but he was too scared to go on his own. So instead, he went to get his grandfather and told him what he was after hearing. The grandfather strained his ear, listening for any noise that would echo through the dark house. And sure enough, he too could hear that something was going on in their bathroom. Tomáš's parents were already asleep in their bedroom, so it could not have been them. And so Tomáš and his grandpa decided to go check this noise out. And when they slowly opened the door to the bathroom, they could not believe their own eyes. Above and along the sink, several tiles were missing, but that was not all. Those missing tiles were actually scattered around the bathroom floor. They looked as if they just simply fell off, because there were no scratches on them, and also they were not broken. Almost as if nobody applied any bonding material to attach them to the wall itself. But that couldn't have been right. Those tiles had been applied several weeks ago, so if someone did try to take them off, they would not be able to do that without them breaking. Then, all of a sudden, another tile just popped off, and then another. Tomáš let out a scream and ran into his parents' bedroom, shouting that there was a ghost in the bathroom. Now, they both had no idea what had just happened, and so while Tomáš's mom tried calming her son down, his dad went to the bathroom to see what was really going on. And once he got in, his dad told him what he and Tomáš were just after witnessing, and that none of it was making any sense. Now, Mr. Smolka had no idea what was happening inside of his house, but he thought that his family was slowly losing their mind. I mean, heavy wardrobes moving on their own, and now the tiles popping off like this? None of this was normal, and so Mr. Smolka decided to visit the police station in the morning and report these incidents then. The following morning, Mr. Smolka arrived at the station and braced himself. He knew that the police were not really going to believe if he said that something mysterious and unseen was responsible for vandalizing his house like that. And so he tried a different approach. When he sat down with one of the officers, he knew that he had to tread really carefully. The country was in a volatile state because freedom of speech was not really allowed. The state was ruled by this communist party, and so anything out of the ordinary could have been seen as an attempt to attack the party, and so everyone had to be really careful. So Mr. Smolka confessed that several items in his house had been vandalized, and that he is sure that the family, or at least the house, is being targeted by someone else. The officer nodded and promised to send someone over as soon as they could, and this would happen about a week later. On one cold afternoon, a worker from the National Committee arrived at the house. This was a woman named Jana Lisakova, and she couldn't wait to go in and have a proper look to determine what was really going on. But very soon, even she would have to agree that something very strange was happening inside of the house. That afternoon, when Jana was going around the house, looking into each and every room, making notes, she was just standing in Tomáš's room when suddenly one of the drawers flew open and the boy's clothes were being pulled out and thrown across the room towards where Jana was standing. She let out a scream and ran into the living room, where she was met with the Smolka's family, staring at her, hoping that she would give them some sort of explanation. But all Jana could say was that she had no idea what had just happened. She was clearly on her own when the clothes were just being hurled at her across the room by something. The family looked with this very sad expression at her, and Mrs. Smolka said, "Let me show you something else." Then, without another word, she gestured towards the kitchen. When both women went in, Mrs. Smolka proceeded to open a small door to the adjacent pantry, and there, scattered all over the floor, were dozens of jars of jams and pickled vegetables. Mrs. Smolka said that she had given up on placing these back onto the shelves, because every time she did that, the jars would once again fall down. But the interesting thing was that none of the glass jars got ever broken, even though the floor in the pantry was not carpeted. Jana could not believe what she was hearing. But as she was about to say something, she felt this cold breeze waft around her ankles, and she could hear a loud bang. She immediately turned around and saw that one of the kitchen pans fell on the floor. Jana looked at Mrs. Smolka for any explanation, to which the woman just sighed and said, "It started again." Then she walked back into the kitchen and made 2 cups of coffees. She gestured for Jana to sit down with her in the living room, and when the 2 women were more comfortable, Mrs. Smolka would finally tell Jana a lot more about the house. She said that all of this started several weeks ago, when they started with some house renovations. You see, not long ago before that, the grandmother passed away, and so Mrs. Smolka wanted to surprise her father-in-law that Christmas by renovating the bathroom and sprucing the whole house by applying new wallpaper. But very early into the renovations, the family started to notice very mysterious occurrences. Mrs. Smolka said that she thought that she knew why all of this started, because it seems like it began just after an old cross had been removed from one of the walls. Now, this cross had always been there, and it was actually Mr. Smolka's mother who placed it there because she was very religious, and she actually warned the family about never removing it, no matter the reason. But as soon as that cross was off the wall, it seemed that it helped something evil to wake up. Mrs. Smolka continued on to say that the freshly applied wallpaper shrunk off the walls, as if someone took them off, rolled them back up, and then stuck that roll back onto the wall. Then the newly applied window trim got ripped off, flying across the wall. And after this, when it was just Tomáš and his granddad home, the heavy ceiling lamp in the living room got dislodged and flew through the window, shattering it. This seemed to set something else off, because a couple of other windows in their house got broken at the same time, as if this invisible force was going through the house, breaking whatever it could. Now at that point, Mrs. Smolka just shook her head, because she could no longer pretend like everything was okay. She told Jana that she knew that there must have been something evil, something like a poltergeist, because things don't get broken on their own. Now, Jana actually didn't want to believe anything she was hearing, but she could not deny any of this herself. After all, she was after witnessing this strange force at work herself. Now, she did promise that she would write a full report on all of this, and that someone else would be in touch soon, but just before she left, Jana heard another couple of loud bangs coming from the kitchen. So the 2 women went in to see what was happening that time, and just as they entered the room, a heavy metal serving dish flew off the table. Then they could hear Mr. Smolka's dad shouting from behind them back in the living room, so when they looked around, they saw him clinging onto the ceiling lamp, which was violently swinging from one side to the other. And then, just as it gave away, it once again flew through the window and out. Jana could see that Tomáš was watching all of this from the corner of the room, and he was now crying because he was beyond terrified of what else might be happening in the house. And so she promised that she would send someone as soon as she could, so that they could finally get to the bottom of this. And then she left. A few days later, Tomáš was sitting in the living room with his mom when there was a loud knock on the door. At first, Tomáš got really startled by this because he thought that maybe another strange thing was about to happen in the house. But his mom just put her hand on his shoulder and said that it was okay, that there was just someone at the door. So they went to answer it together, and when they opened it, a couple of police officers introduced themselves and asked if they could come in and inspect the house. Mrs. Smolka said that it was fine and let them through. But then one of the officers started asking her all sorts of questions about the house and the area. And Mrs. Smolka didn't want to be rude, but she was getting this impression that these officers did not really believe that there was something paranormal or unexplainable happening in their house. Instead, he started to suggest that these events must have had a good explanation, and that he thought that it was all the work of some person trying to mess with the family. Now, Mrs. Smolka heard all of these theories before, and so she tried not to roll her eyes right in front of the officer, when all of a sudden, they could hear the other officer shouting at them from the living room. They hurried over to him, only to be absolutely floored by what they were looking at. The sofa was on fire, but it looked as if the fire started from within the piece of furniture itself. There was smoke coming from out of it, and soon enough the flames would be seen coming from the center of the sofa as well. The officers immediately put the fire out, but they already knew that this was the strangest event that they had ever witnessed. But they were not done yet. Right there in the corner of their eye, they could see this heavy wooden bookcase slide across the floor of the living room. It was leaving marks on the wooden floor. That is how heavy it was. Then the chair started to be slowly pushed away from the table, making this screeching noise as they were being dragged away by this mysterious force. And at the same time, the heavy wooden clock that was hanging on one of the walls started to swing from side to side, so Mrs. Homolka ran over to it and took it down before it could fall and break. But as soon as she did that, the vase with flowers that was sitting on the top of the dining table slid across it and fell onto the floor, breaking it in half. Now, all of this was really scaring everyone because they still had no idea what or why any of this was happening. Now, just as Mrs. Smolka went over to her son to comfort him, because the boy was yet again very upset by all of this, the wooden clock she just put down onto the floor started to slowly slide towards the middle of the room, and the bookcase started to move on its own yet again, back into its original spot. Mrs. Smolka tried pushing it into its place, but it would not stay there. It tried to move about 2 inches to the right. By now, the officers had enough, and so without really saying anything else, they left. Over the next while, Mr. Smolka kept a diary of all the strange and mysterious events that were taking place in the house. He saw the dresser in the master bedroom shift and slowly start to turn to the right, and when they tried pushing it back where it belonged, it did exactly what the bookcase did. It moved away, as if it did not want to stay on its original spot. The same would happen to the table and a few other pieces of furniture. It really looked as if they all magically came alive and decided that they no longer were happy in their place, and so they started to move about to find a new spot for themselves. Another time Mr. Smolka's work bag he always left on the side of the bed suddenly flew under the bed and across the room, slamming into the wall. Then another bookcase standing over in the corner toppled over the armchair, and at the same time one of the paintings and a thermometer fell off the wall. And then the war started to happen. Over 20 small fires broke off in and around the house. And so for the next while, this was the life of Smolka's house. Nobody could explain what was happening, but everyone could see that it was clearly something paranormal. But unfortunately, the family never got the help they needed, and the situation was about to turn for the worse. This case gained a lot of attention. Basically, everyone in the town was talking about the haunted Smolka's house. And this is exactly where things would go wrong. This attention made the case appear in front of the officer of a higher rank named Mamula, and he, with a couple of other officers, arrived at the house sometimes in January 1986. But if you thought that they were there to finally help, then you'd be wrong. Mamula was of very strict views. He did not support anything out of the ordinary. And in the communist country, paranormal activity was strictly prohibited. And so Mamula was there to put an end to this all and make the real perpetrator come clean and confess to everything. And according to him, the person who was responsible for all of those mysterious occurrences was nobody else than the 11-year-old boy, Tomáš. When the news were broken to the family, they could not believe it. How could an 11-year-old boy manage to do all of these things? Most of those objects were too heavy for him to manipulate with, and some of those occurrences happened when he was not even home. But there was no talking to Mamula. Even though Tomáš was still underage, and so in theory Mamula would have needed his parents' permission to take him away, he still ordered for the boy to be taken into a psychiatric ward, without his parents ever agreeing to it. Again, remember, this was during the communist reign, and so people had very little rights. When Tomáš did get to the facility, he would be interviewed for hours. But he was not budging. He continued on to say that he had nothing to do with any of those strange things happening at the house, and that he was actually scared of the place. As the hours would turn into days, Co.Ag would get more and more upset. A week went by and he was practically begging the staff to let him see his parents, and that is exactly where the officials saw the opportunity. They said that they were willing to let all of this go and return Co.Ag back home, but he would finally need to confess to everything. Now Co.Ag couldn't believe it. He knew that he was innocent, but no matter what he said, there was just no convincing these people. And so after a week of intense psychological pressure, the 11-year-old decided to change his story, and he confessed to everything. Now in the past, there actually were cases where paranormal activity was linked to young children and teenagers who were going through all these changes in their lives, and so very unusual things started to happen around them. But when Co.Ag was interviewed even years later, he still continued on to say that he had nothing to do with any of it. There was just no way that he could have shifted those extremely heavy pieces of furniture, and like I've already pointed out, there were even events happening when he was not even home. Co.Ag would later confirm that when he was in the psychiatric ward, the officers continued on to say that they needed to close this case quickly, and that there was nothing like the paranormal, so quit lying and confess. Otherwise they would keep him in the ward forever, and he would never see his parents ever again. So of course, no wonder he did confess, because what 11-year-old wouldn't? To this date, there has never been an official explanation as to what really happened inside of Smolka's house. And to be honest, I don't think that there ever will be one. Some things just cannot be explained rationally, no matter how much you try. And so with all of these witnesses, their testimonies, and even images taken from the inside of the house, this case definitely takes the #1 spot as the most documented and confirmed paranormal activity in the Czech Republic. Now, I would really appreciate if you could subscribe, as I'm currently trying to get to that magical number of 1,000 subscribers, so it would really mean a lot to me if you help me out on this journey. And until my next brand new video is out, check this one out. Until next time.